Evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Man's Hour, episode 32 on hierarchy. I'm joined by a gentleman of power here, none other than Mr. D himself. How are you, sir?
Hello. That was heavy. That intro is very heavy.
Everyone always says that when they come on the show for the first time. Thank you to Chris Gard, who made that one, the
Oh,
resident
was that
plumber.
God? Oh,
Yeah, yeah,
amazing.
yeah. He made that.
Yeah. Um,
It's
I
fantastic.
used to occasionally listen to things like that. I used to like Megadeth, just as a niche, just as a niche interest. So yeah,
Mm, uh,
amazing. Well,
yeah,
I
me
am
too.
doing perfectly well. I just finished my let's see, every 2 hours cup of coffee. So I am sufficiently energized to talk about manly things.
Of course, your favorite topic, of course, Mr.
Indeed,
D. Yeah,
indeed,
indeed.
for very different reasons. Yes.
Yes, of
So,
course, of course, indeed. But one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on here, because I've heard you talk about this topic many a time with our dear friend, academic agent, and others, and I couldn't resist to jump at the opportunity to get you here one on one. Have you all to
mm.
myself to discuss to discuss this topic. Um, and also because we come from different generations and stuff, and you know I was telling you this before we went on air that so I recently went back and visited my high school, and I graduated, almost a dozen years ago now. And my school once was all boys. It has now become integrated, and the whole school has just completely gone to shit. And it's very sad to see. And those 4 years being at that high school were pretty informative for me, in my development and everything as a man and everything like this. And one of the main reasons as such is hierarchy, and it's something that's sorely lacking amongst the I'll call them boys because they're not men yet, of our community, the DR sphere. And I see a lot of issues with men of all stripes just not understanding this very basic concept of, a male hierarchy. So what do you think about that, D? Are you seeing similar issues with people not understanding, their place in the great chain of being?
Well, of course. I mean, there's many points which you brought up, and many directions we could take this. But certainly, I would say, I mean, first off, you're right in the sense that it's very difficult um, to call most males men at this point. I mean, by no fault of their own. Well, I think
Yes.
some fault, but I do
Hmm.
think that there has been, and of course, I think we've all seen it, we've all identified it. But over the past, I don't know, few decades, there has been a kind of extension of childhood. Um, that it just it's gone on longer and longer and longer. So it's very difficult to sort of think about and discuss, a 19-year-old, 20-year-old, 21-year-old male in the same way that you would in 1950 as you would, today. um
Mm.
and I do think that that extension of childhood is certainly part and parcel of this whole sort of package of the dissolving of hierarchy. And we can talk about perhaps the reasons that has gone on. But and again, we've also, I think, in our various spheres, talked about the invention of the teenager. This idea that
Mm.
there's this sort of oh dear, oh dear, the hell was that? That there's this extension of this kind of middle period. And I think it has a lot to do with, of course, that the be all and end all of our society is, of course, materialism. That has become the important thing. Selling things, turning men into consumers.
Mm.
And so, of course, it is very important to kind of stave off this kind of transition into manhood as we used to know it, because, of course, it is an anti-material, and I would say metaphysical, transformation that does not help this idea of a society of materialist, consumer bugmen. So,
Mm.
um, regarding the school thing, of course, yes, I mean, this is, I think, part of the same project, because, of course, dissolving hierarchy is very important, because, of course, hierarchy, traditional. traditional hierarchies, and of course they certainly vary from place to place, but I do think there are similar components to hierarchy in the perennial traditional sense. And yes, getting rid of those is part of the globalist project. And I mean, it's very clear that educational outcomes for men diminish as places are integrated. Males do not do well in educational, in vocational, in military. I mean, any sort of society or pseudo society, male outcomes are diminished by integration with females.
Indeed. Yeah, I remember there was one study, I forget the name of it, but what they were doing military training exercises, and they had 3 different groups. They had an all-male group, an all-female group, and then a integrated group, and they were playing out these war games. Obviously, the team that scored the best was the all-male team. The team that scored the second best, surprisingly, was the all-female team, and then the integrated team was the one that scored the worst out of all 3 of them. And this is just something that plays out in all times and all places when you see things like male only spaces, like the classroom, in education, in sports, or politics, or any of these other things that are traditionally male dominated. Is that as soon as women are allowed access to the space, to no fault of the women in most cases, in my experience, it's more so that just the men just fall over themselves to make the place more accommodating to women, and then the whole space loses its primary function. So yes, these male-only spaces are extremely important for male development, and also because our hierarchies between men are very, very different between the way that women establish hierarchies, if you can even call it the same thing, because theirs is far more communitarian, hence their proclivities to things like socialism.
Yes, exactly. And of course, I think any male can see in any microcosm of this larger issue of a kind of male structure, social structure, you can see, even in the smallest group, you can see the effects. I mean, again, if you have a DM group with like 10 other men, or a Discord server, something like that, your little gaming server, whatever, like a small community of friends, the second you introduce a female, even if it's the most quote based female in the world, the entire dynamics of that group will change, and it will change for reasons that I think are so deeply embedded in our, not even consciousness. I think they're deeply embedded in our, just sort of neurological makeup. I mean, men can't help it, and not even. I mean, not even. It doesn't matter whether they're like straight men or whatever. I mean, any male will automatically respond, and the situation will change. And of course, the introduction of females eventually destroys every group. I mean, I'm old, reasonably old, and I've seen this happen. I have seen it happen so many times in so many different scales. Again, from small friend groups to to organizational, larger organizational groups, and it always works the same way. I think, of course, you will you probably have a lot to say about this, because of course males will again, even if they don't have any specific desire for the women entering the group, males will automatically shift into this other mode, the mode of I don't know, would you say it's the mating mode, or
they start to put on a face, it's, I think it's something deeply ingrained into us, and had to be for thousands of plus years, because the societies that protected their women, the men that protected the women, were the societies that lasted, and the ones that went on. I think this is just part of the male machine that has been here for such a long time, because up until recently, it basically was a requirement that you would have a attrition rate of 10, 20, 30% of men, just because the world is a tough place, and it was a brutal place for the vast majority of human history. And now that we're in such times of affluence, we are allowed to have things like feminism, which is basically nothing more than the weaponization of the male protector dynamic for the advancement of female agendas or something like this. So of course it's this is what makes it such a a dangerous tactic, and that you see today in modernity, is because it is a natural proclivity for men to protect the women. I mean, you see this in mass shooting scenarios where men will just jump in front of women that they never know, women and children first kind of deal. So it makes it so deadly when it kind of hijacks that very important quality that men have.
Yes, and of course this is a positive quality of males, and as you say, it was a survival strategy, certainly for our species, and and I have it as well. Even despite my general feelings towards modern women, it's not a conscious thing, and I have been in situations where it has been activated, and there's it's just how it is. You can't stop it. But I think something else comes on is that not only that the sort of protect the eternal white knight, so to speak, but also I think so males compete. I mean, they compete in small ways, they compete in large ways with each other, but they also, of course, cooperate, and they cooperate with each other in ways that I think certainly many women, most women probably can't understand. It isn't something that I think is easy to explain, that there can coexist competition and cooperation at the same time. And I think this is one of the things that makes males as a group, when committed to some project or some any military endeavor, whatever, this is what makes it so effective, or made it so effective in the past. But when women come into the situation, I think that there enters a different sort of competition. And again, despite the desirability of the woman, the feelings of the males, their willingness to, or their kind of desire for female companionship, there automatically again starts up this subroutine where men begin to display their cooperation diminishes, and a different sort of competition for the attentions of the female. And it's not conscious. It's not a conscious thing. But again, and this is the sort of thing that disrupts this competition / cooperative hierarchy. Certainly, the military is a great example of this. The introduction of females into military units is disastrous. I mean, of course, it has real, measurable, disastrous consequences in terms of the pregnancy rate of women especially put into war zones with mostly male military compatriots. So, yeah, I mean, and so I think that there's just a myriad of problems, but like so many things in our contemporary society, I think most people know the truth. Most people know that this is the case. Most people know that women don't really belong in certain spaces, as that men don't belong in certain spaces. People understand these things, just like people understand what is a man and what is a woman.
Right.
But we all, I mean, I say we just in general, that people are. They will lie. They will knowingly, again, knowing the truth, they will enter into this giant lie. I mean, feminism is a great example of that, because of course every man knew what the end goal of this was, and yet everyone just pretended, and of course as time went on, more and more men and more people pretended that this was going to work, that there was some noble end to this, but we all knew that it wasn't, and yet we all lied, and we all continue to lie, about everything. The girl boss, the equal, that females are equal equal to men in every situation, in every profession, every whatever.
Yeah, we see this everywhere from, you know, the media we watch. I've seen, you know, women like sports reporters being injected into things like Sports Center and things like this. It's like, really, you know, this, you know, 120-pound chick who's never played, you know, a game in her life has, you know, some deep knowledge about the sport and how it's played. Get the fuck out of here. You know, this is absolutely absurd and ridiculous. And, you know, my mind also goes to, surely you've seen these on Twitter. It's like when you have the female like drill instructor, like in the Navy, yelling at, you know, some of the guys who are doing push-ups when, like, okay, so we have to go along with this lie, even though we know that each of these, you know, young cadets could easily rip this woman apart with, you know, his bare hands. You know, it's farcical on the face. And this is one of the reasons why I have, you know, such a huge gripe with, you know, your conservative ink types who get all up in arms about, you know, the differences between men and women when it's related to things that are basically completely meaningless, like women's sports. You know?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, now we have to mention that, you know, men and women are different again, you know, when it's the women that are most affected, you know, but God forbid, you know, we were actually to have a decent conversation about things like representation in the workplace or, you know, birth control or college enrollment or any of these kinds of things that are actually important for our society, as opposed to, you know, bitching and complaining about the national women's soccer team not being paid as much as the men's.
I mean, we're in such a sad state that now the only reason that it is acceptable in any way to complain about the plague of quote transsexualism is through a feminist angle. Like the only reason you can talk about it at all is because all the TERFs, you know, who basically gave society a pass to say, well, this hurts women. This is bad because it hurts women. Well, yes, it is bad because it hurts women, but that isn't the primary reason we should be talking about it. And yet, this is what it is. Again, it goes back to feminism as the excuse. You know, conservative types, you know, when they talk about things like that at all, they will talk about how it harms women in women's spaces. Well, yes, but really, that you need that pass to get through, and you know, and you see it as well. I mean, you will always see these, like, again, girl boss, you know, 5'7" you know, Latina DIs, or you know, yelling at male soldiers, and you'll get lots of, like, you know, military veterans and male members of the military saying, yeah, she was the hardest, you know. I mean, she's just as tough as any man. I mean, again, you know, men, the mechanism that this protective, competitive mechanism is being exploited, basically to destroy the world, you know, and it works. It works every time. I see so many stupid men fall into it. And I'm perhaps more radical than most. I don't think. I think women don't belong in politics. You know, I think women don't belong in governance. I don't think they belong in the corporate world for the most part. You know, and occasionally, I mean, if you go into the past and look, occasionally a woman would rise up in these structures, and very, very occasionally, it would be for really natural merits displayed. But usually, it was a complete failure. Way back in the beginning when we started to see these sorts of things. So
indeed, and these women who would rise up in these ways that you're describing would be some of the most, like, hyper masculine women you would ever see. I mean, I don't think anyone would think that Margaret Thatcher, you know, was the you know, prime example of femininity. You know, but then contrast her to that who the hell is that woman that's running, like, is it Sweden or Finland or Norway, one of the Scandinavian countries, this, like, 30-year-old.
The cat girl?
Yeah, whoever that girl is.
Finland. I can't remember her name. Yeah, she's the prime minister or president of Finland, and
contrast to her, you know, who's
she goes to clubs. Yeah, fucking slagging around in fucking clubs. Uh,
Amazing. You have
yeah.
the leader of your country potentially, devolving, state security secrets during pillow talk with a guy she just picked up at the nightclub. I mean, I'm sure this is a recipe for success.
Well, and then I see, uh, Freedom Gaming, who I know. I mean, I've heard him around. He's around. He may even follow me on Twitter. But this is the problem, of course. She's really hot. Well, yeah, she may be hot. Many of these women are hot. I mean, they're selected because often because they're desirable, and men will give them a pass.
Hmm.
You don't have to deny the fact that she's desirable to say that she's also destroying your civilization. So you've got to be very careful with that. And as I said, the 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 people or groups behind these sorts of things, they know how to exploit our most powerful uh, instinctual desires. So yeah, you got to be careful. You got to be careful. Just because she's hot doesn't mean that she's not a wrecking ball that's destroying the world.
Indeed. And something you can notice very often in these situations. I mean, we look at other politicians like old Horseface down in New Zealand,
Oh,
Jacinda Ardern, or Nicola Sturgeon, or whoever, or
oh
Merkel. Like
God.
of course, all of them are mostly childless. I think Jacinda Ardern has like one kid or something like that. But um,
Yeah.
and they just have this almost pathological femininity to their whole nations, because they just don't have kids of their own, and naturally it causes some serious problems. And you also notice this just in the way like a male hierarchy is structured. Like when you get into something like, for example, you're completing a task. Let's just say, for the sake of the argument, it's building a house or something like that. You'll have like a project manager, of a guy who's there, who's ostensibly like in charge and ordering everybody around, but he's also relying on the cooperation of other men who are proficient in their own skills. And this is always how our civilizations and hierarchies are ran: is guys would get together for a common goal, each of them partnering up with their own skills, and they have one guy who's basically ordering them around and uniting them. But it's not so much in the sense of how women would perceive the situation. Whenever women get in a situation like that and they have to assert a leader above them, they take it very personally, very quickly, as if it's some kind of personal, attack against them, or
Yeah.
some kind of mark on their own personal worth. If, oh, look at this bitch, Becky, she thinks she's better than me. When in a guy's situation, it's just like, no, this is the guy who's in charge of this job. He doesn't think that he's like a better human being than me. Like, we're equal and we're both moving towards this task. Maybe equal is a bad word for it, but there's like a mutual respect between everybody who's working towards the same goal at the end. And even like the underling guys who are taking orders don't necessarily, perceive it as a personal attack.
Well, and again, this is the ancient structure of male hierarchies, and male and men, and I think men will form these hierarchies. I mean, in situations small and large, without even thinking about it. I mean, I do think that some of these things are so deeply embedded in our neurological makeup, that they just happen naturally, and actually to oppose them is unnatural and requires so much coercion. I mean, the thing is, of course, the world order that we're seeing built now, it requires going against almost every tenet of human nature, you know,
Mm,
and and it requires, I mean, again, and that's this hard power thing. And these structures tend to be very brittle. I mean, you certainly know. I mean, everyone who's worked in any kind of, well, in any organization has seen that the power structure built up by women, and I would say that most organizations in the modern world are now female, are now composited by according to female understanding. I mean, the HR department,
mm,
corporate governance, diversity and inclusion, all of those things have turned every organization into basically a feminine hierarchy. And feminine hierarchies, I mean, are brutal. They're brutal, they're irrational, and they are predicated generally entirely on selfish goals, because that, of course, is the goal of a woman in the world, and a woman in nature.
mhm.
She's going to compete for her own, for the as a strategy for her own her own children and her position and her ability to be, protected by a male or males of a tribe or a society. So
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, corporate. I mean, if you ever worked for women, I mean, they're horrible. It's a horrible situation. It often plays off I hate to delve into using, psychiatric terms, but it's this neurotic, you know, cat like, sort of miseries, and of
Hmm.
course the way women compete is. And the competition isn't to strengthen the hierarchy. The competition is to get one over on all your competition, which isn't really how men work, despite the cliches that people think about
Right.
men. I mean, and of course, male competition can be brutal, but it's of a
Hmm.
very different nature.
Indeed. No, for sure. I mean, one of the things you notice all the time is when you see these articles that would come out, about talking about things like, men are so terrible to be around. Men have made things so terrible. Just look at how men talk to each other. And almost always when you see these articles, it's written by a woman who just doesn't understand,
No,
how men form these kinds of bonds. It's almost like it's a shit test basically. Like, oh, if I greet one of my friends and call him an asshole or something like this, and we're not, throwing fisticuffs, that means he's one of my guys. I could trust him. He's on my team. I can rely on him. Whether and women always perceive that as, oh, guys are just being mean to each other. It's like, no, it's not that. It's like, I need to know that, my life is far more dangerous than it is, for the woman, so I got to know I've got some allies. I've got some guys that could cover me, and this is just what we always do. And I see this a lot with a lot of the younger guys who just, they like to dramatize everything. I mean, you see it in, like, in our circles, in our spaces, like, oh, so and so has a beef with this person, even though they make like one comment back and forth to each other. I've
yeah,
noticed this a couple times, funny enough, in comment sections of like AAs and stuff. It's like, oh, Mr. D despises, so and so person or whatever, because he's making fun of people. It's like, no, that's not how this works,
no. I mean, if I publicly talk about someone, I don't despise them. I mean, people that I truly despise, I generally don't talk about at all. I mean, and you're right. I mean, this is something that certainly most women can't understand. I mean, if you ever, I mean, again, people, it's men trying to convince themselves, hey, she's just one of the guys. No,
Mm,
if you treat a woman, any woman, the way that you treat your male
they can't handle
friends,
it.
they can't handle it at all. No, they will eventually break down. It will hurt them, and they will lash out at you in one way or the other. They cannot deal with it. If they, I mean, if most women knew how men uh, interacted with each other, no, I mean, even me, I tend to try to be refined in one way or the other, but still, God's sake, if no, if women knew the sort of things that we said and did to each other. I mean, it's like, I love to rag on you. It's
Yeah, it's
as
all
I
in
do
good
with
fun. Yeah.
as I do with AA. I mean, of course, if people have seen some of the savage things I've said about AA, but of course, AA, and we'll just happily have a conversation right afterwards. I mean, this is, again, as you say, who's going to be on your side for the most part.
Hmm.
And but yeah, certainly the interaction. But sadly, like Zoomers, younger people. I use the word Zoomer as just placeholder because I don't strictly believe in generational cadres in that
Mm,
as an identity, but there certainly is a common thread through a lot of young people, especially young men, where I see them having increasingly feminine styles. You know,
hmm.
the way, I mean, again, the way they interact, the kind of things, the kind of conversations they get into, and the kind of conflicts that they get into, especially on social media, which is also, I would say, social media in general is a feminine space,
Yeah, I'd
with a
agree.
with a feminine style, and it just encourages this, and of course, young, when you're not, I think physical contact with with other males is also important. I mean, this is why
Right.
I agree with you in terms of like your all male educational experience. Obviously military, situations, clubs, organizations, anything like that. I mean, part of the interaction I think that is necessary for male spaces is a physical, interpersonal interaction. So when you're
Mm,
online, when you're sort of deracinated and you're online and you're separated, I think it really pushes people again into this feminine style of backbiting and
mm.
emotionalism of a
Yeah,
sort.
and across, all across all stratas in all these fields, from things like sports, where it's becoming the participation trophy generation, or even worse, where they're getting rid of so much of the physical contact with many of these sports, or even to places in the digital space, like we're all too familiar with in these circles, things like censorship, and not just on like Discord, but also it's getting so crazy at this point that you have gaming companies that are signing on with companies like Discord to basically ban people for speech inside their games. So gone are the days of 15 years ago where people were dropping N bombs, in chats while playing Call of Duty.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely. Yeah,
so
yeah,
everywhere you go, there's just no safety from this. The longhouse, as Bronze Age pervert would call it. It's just
yeah.
creeping in on all of our places. So not only can boys not act like men and basically beat the crap out of each other and learn their own strength, but now we can't even have it where guys can talk like guys in ostensibly male spaces.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, I mean, uh, structures of governance like communism and socialism, I think they're entirely disembodied feminine uh, feminine systems. In other words, I mean, we've sort of hinted at it just talking the last few minutes, but uh, this what we're seeing is so much the kind of uh, what's the best way to put it? The pathological, psychotic remnants of a maternal instinct being loosed upon the world. So you mentioned, of course, how many childless females have been put into various high offices. And I think that I think something happens when a woman isn't able to fulfill these deep, deep instincts, deep sort of uh, deep sort of roles, then over time these instincts they start to kind of turn. It's like a piece of fruit, kind of slowly withering and
Mm,
slowly rotting away. And at a certain point, it goes from being, of course, a wonderful peach into a moldy, toxic mess that if you ate it, you would become ill. And the same thing, I think that as women are denied the ability to embrace the things that they have embraced since the beginning of time, in terms of their role in the family and in the integration of human life. It becomes pathological. So all of these maternal things, all of this sort of care, this maternal care um, for offspring, this sort of need to kind of organize the household, this all of these kind of traditional women's roles, they metastasize and they get applied to like giant structures, like again the governance of countries and such. And of course, in that context, when you extend these ossified maternal instincts to a national government, it becomes, of course, the most oppressive thing you could possibly imagine. It's the therapeutic state. It's the childless woman's, the ghost of her femininity and her fecundity, haunting the halls of power. And of course, then you start getting, everything has to be expunged that presents a threat. Everything is geared towards safety. I mean, we saw this, of course, with the COVID hysteria. And I say hysteria with its historical connotations to the state of women. And it's horrible. But this is what, of course, the socialist sort of globalist dream is. The completely organized, completely controlled, completely dominated by care and safety, to the point where all human life is extinguished. You know, the smothering mother archetype, you know,
Mm.
applied to civilization will be the end of all of us.
Yeah, I mean, you see this in multiple cases. I mean, we were mentioning the workplace earlier, but also just in the, single mother home, just the way that rules of the space are conducted are entirely different when the woman is in charge versus when a man is in charge. With the woman, it's almost always derived of feelings. And how does the space feel? How do people in the space who are interacting with it feel? So you get things like censorship in women's spaces, just to make sure that no one's ruffling any feathers. And that it had to be this way in our ancestral past because women were stuck at home in the village and they had to get along with other women in the group while the men were out hunting and the men were out doing other things. So ostracization from the female group in our ancient past was basically a death sentence for you. And so this is what you see in all these circumstances where they're not rules based, but when a guy gets into a spot and he's managing his space, it's like, okay, here are the rules, here are the ones you kind of have to follow, here are the ones you really have to follow. And it's set in stone, it's not fluctuating all the time. And so you have these kinds of things when guys are growing up in single mother households where they basically just, instead of following the rules correctly, it's just following what this person above me wants me to do because that's going to make them happy, is essentially what it is. And you see this, played out on such a grand scale now across, our entire society, basically, the gynocracy, as we like to call it.
Mm. Yeah, yes, absolutely. And I would also say, try to pull that thread back together. When you create these gynocracies, when you create these sort of total states, I mean, we forget, of course, this project has been going on for a very long time. I mean, many of the things. So, I think a very unpopular opinion amongst our circles is that all of the kind of abstemious, harshly enforced social and even sexual mores that we identify with hierarchy, they're not really part of a real traditional hierarchy. A lot of those things were the product of the Victorian era, certainly in the West, the 19th century, and they were the product of a growing, striving female middle class. And so basically, all of these, well, not all of them, but a lot of these ideas about what constitutes a properly organized and a properly functional state, then they're not really traditional. Again, these are the vestiges of Victorian women. And whether it's, suffragettes, of course, which led to disastrous consequences of female franchise.
The temperance movement as
But
well.
exactly, the temperance movement, these, as we talked about on UO the other day, the suppression of art and literature for the common moral good. I mean, these were concepts that were not really operational in the West until the rise of middle class women in the 19th century. The sort of idea of what a family is, the idea of a man's role in the family, as that once he's married, he will be inexorably involved in the washing of diapers and the birthing of children and the satisfaction of a woman, of leisure. This wasn't this is not a hierarchical family. This is not a traditional family. We have this weird idea that all those things make tradition, but then they're really not tradition. So, and I would say, of course, all those things are the seeds of modern feminism. And it is not a terribly difficult logical leap to go from, as we said, the temperance movement, the suffragette movement, the civil rights. All of these things are, I would say, the concern of a type of middle class, a set of mores that were more about establishing a person's place in society rather than constructing a society that actually functioned. And of
Mm,
course, it all went haywire. It all started to fall apart very quickly. And as soon as, of course, women's suffrage was won, as soon as, of course, all these other things became ascendant and became solidified, everything started to break because, of course, that isn't hierarchy.
mhm.
It isn't a traditional hierarchy.
Yeah, indeed. You can even see you can see this same phenomena that we've been talking about infect and back into the male hierarchy here. You could see it in the way that I guess you would call it the tone policing. I think about a community like ours where so much of the attacks that people have against each other, I'm just seeing it more and more and more about how it's just nothing but personal attacks and slights against people and name calling and things that just aren't arguments. It's a very feminine way of addressing somebody else. And I also get a kick out of it too, where it's like, okay, you have 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old boys who are telling men such as yourself, men such as myself and other people just how to go about and live their lives. And quite frankly, it's like, who the hell are you to be telling anybody else, especially you, keyboard warrior with no power over anybody else, dictating what they should or shouldn't be doing with their lives? And I'm not meaning to turn this into like some shit lib libertarian argument kind of deal here. It's just the simple fact of the matter is that, for me to take you seriously, you have to earn my respect. You have to earn my, you have to earn a say, basically. And
Mm.
people just pontificating online with nothing to back it up, it's just like, that's ridiculous. It's not how men talk. I often quote and say that these guys who are talking about things like feminism and masculinity and such, back to AA's topic about the role of the family, but these people know less about men than they do about women, if you could believe that. So
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right there. And of course, this is oof, uh, I want to broach this carefully because I don't want to. I mean, so I regret ever talking about. I mean, I am very careful, and I generally don't talk about anything personal. I often make a joke about certain things, but I wish I'd never brought up my religious background and my relationship with religious faith. I mean, because by doing that, then I gave a license to people to censure me and insult me and question me about
mm,
that, given other things that that I've that I've made known about myself. So and that's what you will get. You will get people with no moral position, uh, no moral authority to come at me. Of course, because they don't know anything about me. They know how
mm-hmm,
they don't know how I conduct my life. And then they shouldn't. Again, that's for me and for I think people that are slightly older. It's a private matter, that I may share with friends or may share with no one. And if I have to answer for anyone about my proclivities or behaviors or moral being in the world, I answer to the church, I answer to my priest, and I answer to God. You know, and that's it. I don't answer to someone with a bishop's hat
mm-hmm,
avatar, on Twitter, and that's just how it goes. But this
mm-hmm.
is a problem, of course, and this is again that nagging Victorian moral policing that we get. Now, of course, in a larger sense, obviously, I mean, I have said many times, certainly on the topic of male attraction, let's just say,
Mm,
that it is not it is not a concept that should be pushed, as a kind of normal state of a society, because it isn't. It's exceptional. It's always been exceptional. It's always been extraordinarily small. I mean, this is another thing that people get wrong about hierarchy, is that hierarchy, so many people, they're still poisoned with egalitarianism. They're still
yes.
poisoned with this idea that everyone should be equal, that everyone should be should have to answer to the same sort of authority. Everyone should function under the same situations and lifestyles and rules. And it just isn't the case, you know. I mean, your particular sort of philosophies about 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 dating and
Yeah,
mating.
the
I
woman.
don't think
Yeah,
I don't think they're healthy for the whole of society.
I would
But
agree.
and of course, my particular philosophies, quite extreme as they are, and my particular proclivities are certainly not healthy for a functional society when out of their spheres. I mean, and this is something I should also go back and apply to women. I mean, people often say, "Oh, John Dee hates women." Haha. Well, I make a joke about the fact that I do hate women. You know, I'm a misogynist. I don't
Mhm.
really. What I hate is people who start to operate outside of their sphere of humanity and who start harming other people by doing so.
Mm,
And women have done that certainly over the past century and a half, and homosexuals taken out of their of of their proper or sort of marginalized spheres have also done that to the absolute detriment of society. And of course, now we're seeing something even far more radical and horrible than the natural and ancient uh, minority who would have same-sex attractions. We're seeing something monstrous,
mm,
transform, which is of course why I completely distance myself from any sort of identity based upon sexual attraction. But again, this is something that is very difficult to accept about hierarchies: is that there is a place for lots of things and lots of ways of being within certain hierarchies, and they don't apply to everyone.
mhm.
And because we have started to think that they should apply to everyone, this is one of the reasons why the world is going to hell.
Yeah.
Because there may be an exceptional woman who would occasionally rise in the ranks of some sort of profession. We've decided that that should be something not only encouraged but forced for women, because again, we've decided that we must raise up an entire race, we must raise up an entire sex. Again, these anti-hierarchical ideas, these
Mm.
egalitarian ideas, have wrecked civilization.
Indeed. I mean, and you see this with many such things. We were talking about with like moral policing and such. And, as much as you didn't really hit it off with my friend Ryan yesterday on Cigar Stream when you were listening, but one of the quotes he says a lot, and I tend to agree with him a lot, is that unsuccessful people can't do what successful people can. And this ties into so many things that I think it's also a product of just the fact that we live in a democracy, air quotes, is that we have like these sweeping legislations and sweeping laws for everyone. It's like, oh, okay, we're going to, let's take an example, like we're going to make alcohol legal, or we're going to make alcohol illegal, or whatever it is. These just sweeping general terms when really it's, it's a hierarchy, of course. Like people who have their shit together, for lack of a better word, can absolutely, have
Yeah,
a bottle of wine or something. But if you're
exactly.
homeless sitting on the
Yeah,
street, no, you shouldn't be partaking in these kinds of things. And this goes for any manner of things, whether it relates to, sexual degeneracy, whatever term that means these days, or, things like drug use or, positions in the workplace or whatever it may be. It's like, yes, there are tier systems to this, and this is just a simple fact of life.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it is this sense of where, again, we just have this idea. Well, no one should, because working men, you know, lower class, generally working men, um, began to have a serious problem with overindulgence in alcohol during the late 18th century. It's basically as soon as distilled spirits became quite cheap and were heavily marketed, especially to the growing urban working population, they became a huge social problem. So let's just like get rid of them for everyone. Well, no. Again, just because, I mean, most people can't. I mean, you just think of so many examples of this. It's just like, well, you can't fly a DC-10. without crashing it. And you probably, I'm saying you, not you, just
Yeah, yeah.
the average person.
Hmm.
So we need to get rid of them. No one can handle a fire. I mean, this person or group can't handle a firearm. So we've got to get rid of them for the safety of everyone. I mean, again, it's this poisonous egalitarian impulse,
Hmm.
and
And you even see this on the opposite side as well with something like libertarianism. It's like, oh, okay, well, everybody should be free. Well, here's the problem with that. Not everybody can,
no,
and not everybody should as well, or not everybody wants to be free. And that poses a big problem, So you have like libertarians say like, oh, well, children should be able to like buy heroin from, a snack machine or something. It's like, no, it's a pretty stupid idea. And if your philosophy is so ingrained with egalitarianism that you think this is the greatest moral good is just having everybody be the same, it's like, no, the only way to make a forest equal is with an axe. So you're just gonna limit everybody down to the most lowest common denominator, take all beauty, take all vitality out of the world and just smother it. And it's terrible what has happened.
Indeed, and that is the source of so many pathologies. Again, there's that psychiatric term, but I think it's apt. Malignancies perhaps is the better term. And I will say also that hierarchy involves huge responsibility as well. It is not
Mm,
just the libertarian idea of everyone is entitled to hedonism without any consequences. Absolutely not. It's the opposite of that. I mean, I come from a background of a certain class, but I my at least my immediate family were not aristocrats. They weren't titled. My family were landowners, but they were certainly not notable landowners. And unfortunately, because of various circumstances, given my own personal life, I didn't inherit the responsibilities, or the the kind of remuneration that I may have in a different time. So I had to find other ways, other sort of responsibilities for myself, because otherwise, again, you become, you know, the type of person who shouldn't have access to these powers and privileges, because of course you
mm,
don't have the responsibility to manage them and handle them. And this is the problem. You can't just you can't hand the working man an atomic bomb because of course it's just not going to work out very well. Um, and so I think that's sort of essence of hierarchy. But the thing is, we're so buried, we're so far gone that I think it's going to, let's just say, great reset is necessary, but not in the way that globalists think it is. There is
Indeed.
going to be there's going to have to be something cataclysmic to kind of
Mm,
unearth any sense of a way out of this. And of course, it could all end tomorrow if everyone dropped their delusions and stopped lying. And we could easily go out of this, but of course,
mm.
that's not going to happen.
Yeah, and I think it's just, as we're wrapping up here, I think you can definitely have a better input on this than me, but from like an outsider looking in, and I'm looking to across the pond, like a place like the UK, and some of my favorite streams that AA does every year are those Christmas ad streams, where he
Yeah.
dissects, and that is very, very interesting to watch how, I mean, I feel like the average British person has a much deeper sense of hierarchy and their place in the world because of things like the royalty, a long history of like feudalism, lords, and things like this that we simply just don't have in America. So when I see these like Christmas ads where they're just upending the hierarchical nature of things, it feels like it just hits home way more in a country like the UK. What do you think about that?
Oh, I mean, absolutely, because of course it's just naked. It's just naked destruction. I mean, again, it's as the fact that every advert has black people in it. Uh, the black population of the UK remains about 3%, 3%,
Mm,
and yet in every single advert, because of course diversity. That's just the easiest way to put diversity. Oh, diversity means black. so we'll just put black person. Of course, watching adverts in the US. I don't even see white people anymore.
Mm,
They're all black people. Say, but you have a
mm,
much higher. I mean, the US has a much higher percentage. Of course, it's not near majority, but the UK it's 3%. So of course, yes, these hit hard because of course they're attacking things that I think have slightly more resonance than they do in the US. I mean,
mm,
I have a perverse probably fondness for the framers, the founding fathers, and some more than others. You know, it was
mm,
Washington's birthday the other day. I quite like George Washington, but you get figures like Thomas Jefferson for his positive qualities. He injected a lot of nonsense into the beginning of the American project.
mm,
Uh, you know, what is the phrase? All men created equal.
mm.
And I'm afraid that's not true. I mean,
Yeah.
all men are equal. I mean, all humans are created equal to God, but that doesn't mean that they're created with equal faculties and equal positions. And of course, many of those will fall into mortal sin, and will become totally evil. I mean, and that of course is it's a big problem, and so of course you've dealt with the effects of the Enlightenment in ways that Britain didn't. Yeah, so you're right.
Mm.
There is a difference there, but we're all in the shitter, as they say. So
Indeed. All right, let's hit these super chats real quick, and then we will wrap up here.
did we cover
Uh,
everything? I want to make sure I didn't talk. Blathering away and say
no, no,
we.
this is a good conversation for sure.
Okay,
Um,
good.
yeah. All right, here we go. Mr. Theo Tugboat for $2. I like Mr. D. Well, I like Mr. D too. So
Oh, and I like you,
yes,
Red Hawk, and I like Mr. Theo Tugboat.
yes, indeed. And then we got JD, good friend of the channel, of course, for five British pounds. As Bowen asks, do you tear apart societal norms that we all know to be true to support the few women who can vaguely compete in a man's world? That's a very good point.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, it seems that we've decided to do that. So
Yeah, exactly. That decision has more or less been made for us, unfortunately. So, but uh, there's much work to be done, for sure. I mean, I've said for a long time that it's going to have to be the men. They're going to have to fix the men, and the women are going to have to fix the women in this place because, one last thing that I'll mention is we were talking earlier about how, the the conservative ink types will be up in arms about the, transgender bathrooms and women's sports and everything like this. And that's because, they have to attack it from a female angle, like women most affected, because that's where the authority is today. It's the
yeah,
authority is with the women, So in a gynocracy, that's the attack vector you have to use, and
yeah, and
that's
it,
just
it's
the way it
and
is.
yeah, and of course it's again using a psychiatric term. It's pathological. I mean, giving almost $100 billion to a foreign country is pathological charity. Again, this idea. Where did that idea come from? That we have to give until it hurts. I mean, in the
Mm,
UK, there were literally posters that said, giving up. Uh, I can't remember the exact wording, but basically like, it doesn't matter if we have to like go without electricity. We need to give. We need to give so that we can protect freedom. Well, I don't want to protect freedom. If that's
mm,
what freedom is, I don't want to do that. But again, this perfectly noble idea of charity has turned into a hateful pathology.
mm,
It is not charity when you're throwing money into a clothes washer in the Balkans. Let's just say.
mm,
Anyway,
indeed. Well, I enjoyed this discussion very much, D. I hope you did too. Anything you would like to plug?
um, I got to be careful with that one. No, I don't have anything going on. I'm sure I'll be on the Deepest Lore or UO or something. I mean, that seems to be my place. You can follow me on Twitter if you've never heard me before. If you can tolerate me, it's at John D, and except it's the old style I instead of J, so it's IOHNDEE. But yeah, that's all, and I am very happy to sit here next to you, Red Hawk, and have this chat.
Yeah, I enjoyed it very much. And you guys can follow me on Twitter as well. And occasionally you will see me pop into Mr. D's late night Twitter spaces from his, command center at the bottom of the sea, So
How I get that
indeed.
Wi-Fi signal down there, I'll never know.
Well, you're a Bond villain, are you not? So, you have some you got some tricks up your sleeve, of course. Alrighty. Next week on Man's Hour, we are doing another partnership with Poe the Person from Wham and Hour. So we're going to
Oh,
be discussing the Friend Zone. So go over to Poe the Person's channel tomorrow. She's going to be talking about the Friend Zone, and then the Man's Hour panel. I'm going to have to assemble a crack shot team, to tackle this topic. So keep your eyes open for that. But all right, we'll wrap it up here. See you next time, guys.